and welcome back to Board Game Blender. My name is Zee Garcia. Today's episode is called Be Civilized, and of course we are talking about civilization-style games, whether that is big, massive civilization games, like games called Civilization, or Mega Civilization, and that's particularly terrifying, or little simple card games with a civilization theme. It's all going to be included in here. We have interesting interviews for you. We have little crafty things for you. Lots of different segments. So as always, please enjoy the show. And let's kick it off right away. Here we go.
Hey guys, Tiff here, and this week we're talking about Civ games. Unfortunately, it takes a pretty long time to build an empire, even in cardboard form, so my middle school board game club doesn't get to play too many of them. Sure, we have Carcassonne, but there aren't too many games that give you an authentic, building, conquering civilization feel in under an hour, but luckily last year I discovered one. It's Nations the Dice Game. Nations the Dice Game is a 1 to 4 player civilization building game from Asmodee that plays in about 45 minutes. You play 4 rounds in which you create the history of your nation by conquering colonies, constructing buildings and wonders, hiring advisors, and fighting wars and famine. It sounds like a lot, but the gameplay is extremely simple. You start by filling the progress board with tiles for the current round, or age. These are the buildings, colonies, advisors, and wonders that will be available to buy during the round. You also reveal an event tile which will give you war and famine objectives to reach by the end of the age. Each player has an identical board with their 5 buildings. These buildings show you which dice you have available to roll on your turn. To start, you have 5 white dice, a reroll chit, and a gold chit. Once you roll your dice, you have 3 action choices: reroll, buy a tile, or build a wonder. To buy a tile, you pay the cost based on which row the tile is in and place it on your player board. You have to conquer colonies with strength, but buildings, advisors, and wonders cost gold. Newly bought buildings will replace older buildings in your tableau, so you have to update your dice pool immediately. Once you buy a wonder, you can build it on a subsequent turn by paying its construction cost in stone. Wonders, along with colonies and advisors, will give you additional chits, which can be used once each round along with your dice. You can have several wonders and colonies, but only 1 advisor at a time. Play continues until everyone decides to pass, then in reverse order, each player gets to collect books. For each book face on your dice, or chit, you'll move up 1 space on the knowledge track, and then that track is scored. You get 1 victory point for each player below you on the track. You can also gain victory points by meeting the war and famine objectives revealed on the event tile. Just trade in the correct amount of food or strength for the points indicated on the tile. You play all 4 ages like this, and of course at the end, the player with the most victory points wins. Nations the Dice Game makes for an easy introduction into the civ building genre. It's got all of the civilization elements, but without a mountain of fiddly rules and a giant box with a million components. In fact, there are only 4 pages of rules that are outlined well enough that teenagers could teach this to themselves. The artwork isn't particularly inspiring, so it might take a little selling to get them to try it, but it's definitely worthwhile if you have kids that would be interested in a very loosely themed historical game. I think using the dice for resources is a clever way to add fun factor to what's normally a pretty dry, strategic genre. I enjoy it quite a bit, so give it a try, and I'll see you back next time.
Hey folks, welcome back to 2 for 1. As we all know, space to keep board games, that real estate is always at a premium. And so in this segment, we're going to be taking a look at 2 games, 2 good games that share some kind of parameter. And then I'm going to be telling you about 1 game that I think could replace those 2 games in your collection. And so the parameters today are going to be, they have to be Civ games, and they are going to be card-driven games, because I tend to like card-driven, or at least games that are heavily influenced by cards. Tend to like those Civ games the best. And today we're going to be doing this Goldilocks style. One is going to be possibly too light, one is going to be too heavy. We're going to find one that's just right in the middle. Hopefully it'll fit the most situations. And so here we go. First choice, 7 Wonders Duel. A pretty light, interesting, lots going on. This is a recent favorite of mine, but it is a game that only plays 2 players. and it could be a little too simple. There's no board, there's none of that going on in it, and so it's just those cards. Also, the fact that it's only 2 players is going to limit how many settings you can bring this out in. So there you go. Our next choice, Mare Nostrum. Now, not this edition of Mare Nostrum, because this is an old edition, but the game is about to come out again, called Mare Nostrum Empires. It was a recent Kickstarter, and this is our too big choice. There's a lot going on in this game. You are going to have all of the fight and all of the epic clashing and all the trading and the politics and all of that comes in most Civ games, but this is going to be several hours and there's quite a bit going on in here. And so our happy medium game, this is your 2 for 1, is Deus. Deus does have a board element. There is going to be some building placement and such, a little bit of confrontation there, still card driven, and still a fairly light concept to grasp, but it allows you to play more than 2 players, and it does not take several hours to play. So I find this to be a very happy medium between these 2 previously mentioned games. And so if if the space on your shelves is definitely running a little low, this is one I would take a look at if you are looking for a Civ game. A light Civ game, you know, not something like Mega Civilization or anything like that, that is going to hopefully fit the most get-togethers possible, right? The most different styles of gaming opportunities. So there you have it, your 2 for 1 choice for this episode. We had Mare Nostrum, we had Seven Wonders Duel, happy in the middle, not too warm, not too cold. Deus. Check this one out.
Be friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. It is time to talk about a game of civilization.
Through the Ages, a new story of civilization, an epic scale civilization game that takes you from antiquity to the modern times. Let's take a look.
Through the Ages is a pretty complicated game and not for beginners. That includes the board. Instead of one board, there are several separate ones. The card row board holds cards available for purchase. The science board tracks the knowledge of your civilization. The military board tracks not only your strength, but also your available military tactics and events. The tiny current age board hosts a civil and military decks for the current age. The culture board tracks your civilization's culture, also known as victory points. Each player also has their own player board. With all these boards, there are so many choices on your turn. At the end of the game, the player with the most culture points wins.
Civilization is such a massive game, we can't possibly do a full playthrough for the game, but maybe that would give you a little taste of how complex this game is. This reminds me of the old video games we used to play back in the day, the Civ games and the Alpha Centauris and the Master Orion type games. And it focuses in more on the technology and the tech tree, which I like because I'm kind of a techie kind of person. It kind of puts the military in a back seat, and I'm okay with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really enjoy all of the different options and choices that you have, just the plethora of ideas and different things that you can do throughout the game. In fact, hoc multiplex natura ludi mihi potissimum placet. Denuone latina loquebar. Me adeptum. Interdum modo alabitur. So, you were saying? Well, anyway, thank you so much.
Congratulations!
back to another episode. Today we have Power Barons, published in 1986 by Milton Bradley. This is a 3 or 4 player game in which you and your fellow millionaires are trying to control the world in transportation, communications, finance, and energy. Let me set this up and show you how it works. So this is what the game board will look like set up. I have set up a 4-player game here. Every player is going to pick a color and put it in their respective spots. Here, here, there, or there. And then take their colored playing pieces which they're trying to lay out on the board. They're going to get drawn 8 power cards. And each of the power cards are numbered between 5 million and 50 million in each of the different suits. There's transportation, finance, communications, and energy. And then there's also special political influence cards, which I'll get to in a second. Now you would just decide who goes first, and then play will pass to the left. So what the first thing you do is you're going to draw a card and then bank a card, because you can only have 8 cards in your hand. And the banking we'll get to in a second here. And then you're going to go ahead and roll 2 6-sided dice and move around the board and just do whatever it says on the space that you land. And the spaces are limited challenge, take a political influence card from somebody, take a power card from somebody, remove a power base off of the board, and look at a player's hand and steal a card. And then what you're going to do is challenge another player. And I'll get to that in a second here. And then after that, if at any time in your bank you have 300 credits, you can go ahead and buy a power base of your choice and place it anywhere on the board. So when you're challenging a player, the first thing you need to do is decide what piece you're going to be trying to put on the board. Let's say, for example, I'm trying to put a communication towers on the board. Now the challenge is going to work over 4 rounds. Each round you're going to play 1 power card from your hand of a different suit. Like, for example, if my opening card is a energy, that means my opponent has to play an energy card of any denomination. And then the second round, I'll play a communications card of 50 denomination. That means my opponent has to play a communications card. And then so on and so forth with the finance and with the transportation. Now, if at any time my opponent cannot play the same suit that I played, he loses the challenge. Or if me as the attacker cannot play a different suit at any time, I lose the challenge. Now the winner of the challenge will take all the cards and bank them into their bank. Now here's where the political influence cards come into play. Now if I had any in my hand after the 4 rounds, you can go ahead and play those political influence cards. Now the object of the challenge is to have the higher total than your opponent. Now, if I was the attacker and I won the challenge, I get to put my playing piece somewhere on his territory on the game board. You successfully win the game if you can build 4 different power bases in both of your opponent's territories in a 3-player game. And in a 4-player game, you win if you can build 3 different types of power bases in each of your opponent's territories. I really like this game simply because there is no runaway leader. At any time, anybody can win the game. Simply by rolling and moving around the board, all these spaces that you land on are equally helpful. Also, the key to victory will be knowing when to challenge people, knowing who to challenge, and with what piece to challenge them with. All this together mixed in makes for a really fun and exciting game. Well, that's all the time I have for now. May your rolls be high.
So since we're talking about civilizations, there's only one game I can think about that defines civilizations, and that is the game Civilization. So for me, my designer spotlight this week is on a designer that I respect so much, Francis Tresham. Now, he designed Civilization in 1982. This is a game that won every award back then, the Charles S. Roberts Award, every award that you can think of. If there was a Spiel des Jahres for games back then, this was the equivalent. He won everything for this game. It is the first game that had tech trees. So when you're talking about all these modern games that use a tech tree concept where I buy this technology and then with this technology I can now upgrade to this technology, he did this in the game Civilization back in 1982. he had, you start out and you buy, like, if you buy mysticism, then you can work your way from mysticism up to a different religion, like monotheism or proselytism. So you could buy these different religions. There's also, like, you can buy coinage, and then you could buy agriculture, and when you buy agriculture, then you could buy farming, and you could buy city building and all these things. The concept of the game is very simple. Basically, you're spreading pieces on the board. Every turn you grow your pieces, you spread out, and then based on the amount of, and then if you have a certain amount, you get cities, and these cities will give you cards. Now this game, since it's such an old game, it really gives the meaning of trading in the Mediterranean. I know we always joke about the term trading in the Mediterranean, but this is a true trading in the Mediterranean game in every aspect. You don't just trade with the board, you actually trade with the other players. So every turn you are literally trading. I'm Crete and I'm trading with Egypt and I'm trading with Babylon. I'm trading with all these other civilizations cards. And you could get good cards, you could get bad cards. When you get the bad cards, you're gonna have fatalities and disasters hit your civilization. When you get the good cards, you're building sets which you could use to buy all these technologies in the tech tree. And it's very important to use that tech tree to advance in the game. You can tell how great this game is because over the years, other people designed expansions, advanced civilization. Now, recently, there's the new mega civilization that was put out, and it's just an ode to Francis that all these other versions of the game have come out since then. Just like his other game, which I'd like to throw in for a moment. It's not really a Civ game, but it's my favorite game of all time, and that is 1830. Obviously, in 1830, it's a stock market economic game, but he made an amazing game, and over the years people respect his design so much that they've all made versions of his game. So for me, a great designer, especially if you're looking for one of the best Civ games out there, is Francis Tresham.
It's Maggibot, and today we're talking about Civilization games. I hope others are regaling you with really awesome giant war sprawling 4X games, but for me, my favorite type of Civilization game lies in true stories and inventiveness and sort of the other side of the culture of Civ. So the first one I would always recommend if anyone needed a Civ game is Innovation. Innovation takes you from prehistory all the way through the modern age, inventing things as you go. The most telling thing I can say about whether or not someone would like Innovation is there's not one broken strategy, there are only broken strategies, so it's really about mitigating who you think is in the lead, crushing their really strong cards, getting out one of your own and trying to keep it. If you see like coal or gunpowder hit the table, you have to know that those are big flashy cards and you gotta shut them down. So it's got a little diplomacy in it. It was one of the first games I played. It was played on the same day I first played Dominant Species, and I have been their fan ever since. There's a brand new 3rd edition with new graphic design and some cards that changed a little bit. Absolutely gorgeous. I wish I had my copy, but I crushed it on accident. Luckily, it's only $20 to replace. It is shipping to stores right now. The other one I wanted to talk about is Nippon again. Nippon focuses on one particular time in Japan's culture where they literally just kind of looked around, said that they felt a little bit too rural or behind the West. They sent out emissaries to bring back technicians and scientists and scholars, and they literally just went through a rapid change. So each player is playing a business trying to have the biggest network in the new culture of Japan. It's a really cool thought, and you can see that still in Japan, looking forward, being inventive, always chasing new tech, and that's what they do still to this day. I love Nippon. It's an action selection game. You put out some meeples. As you pluck them off the board, you take the action associated with them. The more colors you choose, the more income you're gonna have to pay. So at any time, you can kind of sweep off all the meeples you've collected that round, and you have to pay your people, and you don't get an action that round. It also has a really cool mechanism where each time you kind of sweep off your meeples and you collect them, you get a bonus for points at the end of the game, and you have to assign it to one of 8 or 10 choices. Really difficult, very cool choices. It really flavors the game, and it's never boring. One other thing I really love about Nippon is the pacing of the game. You have just enough time in between turns to really determine what you'd like to do, and if someone spites you out of one meeple, it's not the end of the world to take a different color, which is really nice. It's easy to be a little bit mean in the game, but not so mean that it'll make people feel bad. That's all for me for now, and I will see y'all next time.
Hey folks, for today's Quirky Game, I wanted to highlight a proper Civ game, meaning a big, epic game with all of the usual trappings of that genre, but I wanted it to be a game that played well with two players, which is not often the case because of the way the genre operates. And so the game I'm going to be featuring, and the game that works really well with two because it's only for two players, is Antique Duellum. Antique Duellum is based on its big brother Antique from the same designer Maggibot. And in the game you are trying to accomplish several things which the game has cleverly translated into victory points and made the end game goal very clear. You are going to be doing things like building temples, destroying the opponent's temples, sailing the seas, things like that. And by doing these things, you are accomplishing cards, which are victory points, and once you have 9 of these cards, you win the game. The problem, of course, being that the opponent can take these cards from you because there's a limited number of them. And so, by cleverly doing that, the game has all the usual sort of feel of a Civ game. You have a tech tree, you have troop management and sailing, you have different provinces that produce different goods, and it's all still wrapped around the rondel mechanism that Antique had. This game was in fact clever enough that the designer then put out a game called Antique 2 that took a bunch of ideas from his 2-player version Antique Duellum. And so I think this is a great game for those of you looking for a Civ game that plays with just 2 players. I think there's a lot of players out there that sometimes cannot get to a big gathering, don't have the gaming group, and so you can just play this with your significant other, you can just play with a single other person, and you're still going to have a great time. This is a game I owned for a long time and no longer own, largely because I have a lot of 2-player games, a lot of them, and this is one that did not often hit the table. Not because it's not a good game, but because it's a fairly complex game, it's a longer game, and it's a pretty big box, so it was taking up a decent amount of real estate on the shelves here behind me. So there you have it, Antique Duellum. If you're looking for a Civ game that plays great with 2 and feels like a classic in the genre, this is one you should be looking into. Antique Duellum.
Hello folks, welcome to Corner Chat. I'm Mark. Today we have with us Jaimey Stegmaier from Stegmaier Games, the designer behind Euphoria, Build a Better Dystopia, and Verticulture, along with many other fantastic titles. Thanks for joining us today, Jaimey.
Yeah, Mark, thank you so much for having me on Board Game Blender. This is my first time on the show, so I'm honored to be here.
So, we are talking Civ games, and games that deal with cultural advancement, utopias, etc. What are some of the hard choices you had to make when designing Euphoria, and what elements did you reluctantly leave out?
I haven't outright designed a fully formed civilization building game, but pretty much all the games that I've designed, except for maybe Viticulture, have had Civ building elements to them. And one of them, as you mentioned, is Euphoria. There are a couple things that I had to drop out of the Euphoria design that didn't quite work out, and 2 things that came to mind. There are quite a bit that came in and out during the playtesting process, but 2 that came to mind. One, early on in the game, and throughout maybe a third of the playtesting, there was dice manipulation in that you almost use the dice as counters. So your workers got smarter or dumber as they moved around the board. And I realized that as handy as dice are as counters, the best thing about dice is that you get to roll them. That's where kind of all the endorphins come from with dice. And so I got rid of that element and just had it a game where you're placing dice on the board and then retrieving them and rolling them so that you get to roll those dice a lot during the game. The other thing that came to mind is for almost all of the playtesting of Euphoria, the markets that you're building, usually together with other players, they have penalties that everyone who didn't build them incurs. And early on throughout most of the playtesting, those penalties were permanent. So if you didn't get in on the construction of a building, that penalty was permanent for the rest of the game, which I thought was a lot of fun because I like to work around constraints in games. when I'm playing games. But as it turned out, most players wanted a way out of that. They wanted a way around it. And so I built in a way for them to get out of those penalties.
So, what are some of your personal favorite Civ-type games, and what games have provided inspiration for you when designing Viticulture, Euphoria, and the upcoming Scythe?
Yeah, some of my favorite Civilization-type games, or games that have elements of Civ building in them. And yeah, it's always fun to tie in my other games and how they inspired my games. So a few of my favorites that came to mind are Terra Mystica, which isn't it isn't a traditional civilization building game, but you really are starting from scratch and building something that ends up resembling a civilization, especially visually. Nations is probably the most prototypical Civ building game that I enjoy, although it is very punishing. So it's I get more excited about rewarding games than punishing games, and Nations is a pretty punishing game.
Okay, so how do you identify and choose different aspects of society to use as advancement tracks in your game? So for example, maybe you would choose public transportation as something a player could invest in, but not something like sewage processing.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And there are so many paths that tracks can take in games, including civilization games. I mean, there's so many. If you had to start a society from scratch, there's so many different things that you'd have to worry about and pay attention to, and decide. Do we want to focus on this or not on this? And I love how we kind of abstract those into games as tracks. And I guess the one thing that comes to mind as I'm thinking about this is a game that I love that has tracks that I really, really love is Orleans. I love the tracks in Orleans because it's very rewarding. I mentioned Nations earlier as being a punishing game. Orleans is a very rewarding game. When you move up on those tracks, not only are you usually getting a permanent benefit, a permanent upgrade, or an end game upgrade, but you're also getting something right away, so you get that instant satisfaction of moving forward. And often on many of them, there's a slight race element too, where you're trying to get slightly ahead of the other players to grab something that they weren't able to grab. I love the tracks in that game. I think tracks. One thing I really like about tracks that relates to Civ building games is that you get to decide the asymmetry of the game, basically. And I do love games that give you like a starting power or different starting resources than other games. But I also like when that complements decisions that you make fairly early in the game that kind of define who you are. And tracks do that really well. If you make a decision early on in Orleans on one of those tracks, that's going to impact you for the rest of the game in ways that you can't even see yet. And I love that.
Right. Well, since I have you here, we need to talk about a game I'm pretty excited for, Scythe. I love the theme. What was your inspiration for this one, and what can players expect? And of course, when will it be available?
Yeah, Scythe. I'm glad you're excited about it. Thank you for sharing your excitement for it. I am too. We're just a few weeks away, really, from getting the advanced copies. So I'll see like the very first copies off the print run. I mentioned Terra Mystica earlier as one of my favorite games with a lot of Civ building elements. Terra Mystica and Kemet are the two games that really had the biggest influence on Scythe. Terra Mystica I consider, again, a rewarding game where things that you're doing often give you multiple rewards and you're always kind of moving forward and advancing. I tried to carry that over into Scythe, where pretty much all of the actions you take in Scythe give you a double benefit, whether it's two of the same benefit or two different complementary benefits. Kemet as well, which is not quite a Civ building game, but it does have like a lot of advancement tiles that are related to kind of building your empire. Actually, I would call Scythe an empire and engine building game, and both Kemet and Terra Mystica have those elements. But Kemet, in Kemet, I love that there is combat in Kemet. In fact, it's really the focus of Kemet, whereas it's not really the focus of Scythe. It's just part of this empire building and expanding that you're doing. But I love in Kemet that if you do have a battle and you lose, you're not really set back all that much. In fact, it usually gives you a chance to regroup and then attack again. I really like that. And so in Scythe, it does the same thing. If you lose combat, but you put up at least a little bit of a fight, then you get to draw a combat card, which thematically translates to kind of you've improved in how you can fight. And maybe you've scouted out the opponent's ability to fight too, and their tactics. So you now have a little bonus card since you were willing to at least participate in the battle. That changed during playtesting too, because sometimes people would kind of back away and just let themselves be beat and then come back and fight again. So that's in Scythe, it is kind of a game of you're starting out on the outskirts of this territory, this kind of unknown land, and you are encroaching onto it and then building up an empire as you expand onto it. So even though you aren't starting from scratch like in some Civ building games, there is an empire building aspect to it.
Okay, so tell folks where they can learn more about Stegmaier Games, and are there any future plans or titles you can talk about?
Thank you so much for having me. If you want to learn more about Stegmaier Games, our website is stegmeiergames.com, Twitter, Facebook, also at Stegmaier Games. And the game that I'm currently working on that also relates to this conversation is a game that I will officially announce in about a month. It's called Charterstone, and it is it's a village building legacy game where you are arriving at a new land with your fellow players, and you are building up a village on that land that you and the players will occupy. So it's a competitive game, but you are not cooperative, but it's like, you're operating within the same village. So when I build something in the village, if I build a blacksmith, I can use that blacksmith, but other players can also use it. It becomes a kind of a worker placement action space that anyone can use and get a benefit from. And I'll talk more about it when I do the official announcement, but that's the thing that I'm most excited about and that I'm working on right now.
Well, Jaimey, thanks so much for joining us today. It was really great having you on the show. And many thanks to you folks for watching. So until next time, we'll see you at the table.
Welcome to Boards and Crafts, a place for quick tutorials of snacks and crafts inspired from games, for games, and all about board games. This week we're talking about being civilized and games that help us be so. One of the games that helps me be civilized is Carcassonne, because whenever I feel like getting mad, I just look at these adorable little meeples. Let's make some meeple pizza. The supplies that you'll need for this project are as follows: pizza crust mix, a half cup of hot water. Well, at least that's what my mix called for, so depending on what yours calls for, depends on how much you need. Pizza sauce, some cheese, topping of your choice to make the meatball out of, olive oil, a bowl to mix everything in, a pizza pan, some spoons to mix stuff with, and cooking spray. Once you get past pizza crust mix instructions, pretty much everything is exactly the same. So for mine, I needed to preheat the oven to 475 degrees Fahrenheit. Then I greased the pan with the cooking spray. Next, I combined the pizza crust mix and the half cup of hot tap water into the mixing bowl and mixed it all together with my spoon. I formed this into a ball and greased it with about 1 teaspoon of olive oil. I let this be covered by a towel and set it on the oven while it was preheating for about 5 minutes. I pressed the dough evenly onto the bottom of the pan using my hands covered in olive oil. So next I put the pizza sauce on there and then the cheese, followed after my select topping, which in this case was pepperoni. Then I stuck it into the lowest rack in the oven for about 10 minutes or until the crust is golden brown and the toppings are hot. Take this out and let it cool down for a bit and then it's ready to serve. And that's it! If you guys have any ideas for tasty treats or creative crafts inspired by any of the board games mentioned here on the Board Game Blender, comment below or tweet them at me at ArtsyRobot. Thank you guys for watching. I hope that you have a great day.
Hey folks, welcome back to another Real Talk with Sam. It's been a while because I took the last blender off. I just couldn't logistically get my segment together, so I apologize for slipping last time. But this time we're back in full force, and this is a great one to come back in on because Civilizations is actually not one of my most favorite genres, which is kind of strange because I do like the idea of taking your civilization, your village, your culture, whatever it is, and trying to build it and go up. But as I was looking through my shelves, I really didn't have a lot of games that I really enjoy enough to keep, at least, that are civilization based. I like the idea, but I guess I just don't like playing the games that much. Most of the ones that I know of, at least, maybe there's some out there that I just haven't played yet, but most of the civilization games that are out there, you're building up your civilization and then you are getting ready for conflict. That's kind of part of the whole point of building up your civilization. Now, I know that there are games like Seven Wonders where you can build your civilization towards a certain end and kind of leave fighting and conflict out of it, but more often than not, at least in the games that I've been able to think of, you're simply building up your civilization in order to conflict with somebody else's civilization and hopefully subdue them, or at least avoid being subdued by them. So the first game I wanted to talk about is actually brand new on my radar. It's coming out this year, and we just got it into the Dice Tower last week, and I'm so excited about the game. I actually pumped out a review, bam, just like that. And that's Meeple War. Meeple War is where you are taking your village, aka civilization, and you're trying to basically put enough mechs out on the board, get enough bonuses on the board, control enough territory on the board to make your civilization more powerful. The whole point of the game is to get to 6 victory points first. Now, if more than one person gets to 6 victory points at the same time, there are tiebreakers, and you do that by using your buildings in your village to build more mechs or produce more catapults that you can destroy the other person's buildings with, and that type of thing. It's really neat. It sounds heavy, but it really isn't. It actually plays in about an hour, even with 4 players. So it's a really neat, fast, light-hearted Civ game that if you haven't checked it out yet, you really, really should, because I think it'll be right down a lot of people's alley. And then another one that I thought about is kind of my tried and true. It's that game that's on my shelves that I really try to shoehorn into as many little crevices as I possibly can. It's Twilight Imperium 3. This game is all about. Now, people probably will say, oh, that's not a civilization game. That's an epic space 4X game. And I'm like, well, yeah, you're taking your civilization in space and you're trying to get that civilization to the top of the throne, the galactic throne. And on the while, you're building up your technologies, you're spreading out, you're doing a lot of different things that you normally do in civilization games. So I really do think it fits into this. And quite frankly, I don't care if you agree with me or not, but listen, I'm just trying to keep it real, y'all. See you on the flip side.
What's going on? I'm Roy Canay from Epic Gaming Night, and this is From Easy to Epic, where we talk about an easier game with a focus on the beginner, and then we talk about an epic game with a focus on advanced play. This week on The Blend is all about civilizations, building your culture, and getting upgrades, and furthering along your people. So this week, the first game we're going to talk about is Seven Wonders Duel. Seven Wonders Duel is a 2-player competitive drafting game where players will take turns drafting cards from a pyramid of face-down cards to try to better their civilization. These cards can give you more resources, gold, military, science, and other special abilities. Many of these cards require prerequisites to be able to draft them, but you can also discard the cards to just get gold. If a player is able to achieve military or science victory, they will win the game. If not, then the game ends at the end of 3 ages, and whoever has the most victory points on their cards is declared the winner. Seven Wonders Duel is an awesome Civ game where you're drafting cards in this 2-player game. I love the pyramid draft where some of the cards are face down, some are face up, and there's cards stacked on top, and you're trying to figure out which cards you should take to help your civilization, but not give away cards that are too good for your opponent. It's a great game for 2 players if you're looking for a short, quick little Civ game, and I love that there's multiple different end conditions on there. You can go Warfare if you're trying to grab all the war cards, and then it forces your opponent to try to stop you from doing that. It's a lot of fun, so make sure to check out Seven Wonders Duel. For our more epic game, we're going to talk about the king of epic games, and that is Twilight Imperium 3. Twilight Imperium 3 is a 3 to 6 player competitive game with space conquest 4X style play. Players will explore the galaxy, expanding into different planets and areas that they found. They will exploit the resources from those planets and try to better their civilization, and then they will exterminate their opponents to try to win victory. Each player will take the role of an alien civilization trying to set themselves up as the new superpower in the galaxy by even taking over the center planet of Mechatol Rex. Each player will work to complete public and secret objectives to gain victory points. The first player to 10 victory points wins the game. You have to set up your civilization in a way to be able to complete objectives and claim victory for your race. Twilight Imperium is a truly epic game and is an experience that will not be soon forgotten. Twilight Imperium 3 is my favorite board game of all time. I love how you start out on a small home world and you're expanding your civilization to gather other planets, trying to figure out how to take the objectives while getting technologies for your civilization and your race, and just trying to do everything you can to figure out a way to get your group to the 10 victory points needed to win the game. It's an awesome game. There can be combat and stuff in it as well, but there's also a lot of negotiation and passing laws and political stuff and trade goods and all sorts of crazy stuff that goes along with this game. This game is my all-time favorite game. There's no other game that's as epic. So make sure to check out Twilight Imperium 3. This has been From Easy to Epic. Check us back next time. Also make sure to check out our podcast at www.epicgamingnight.com. Thanks so much, and stay a friend of the blend.
And that, ladies and jelly beans, is our episode. Be civilized, people. Be civilized. We will see you again in a couple of weeks. We are talking sort of the opposite of this theme. Civilization, of course, being about building up and beauty and the longevity of things, and we are burning it all back down next episode, calling it Pillage and Plunder. So, of course, about pirates, but about pretty much any setting where we are razing it to the ground. So tune in for that. As always, a big thanks to my contributors, and a big thank you to you. And hey, stay a friend of the blend. I'll see you.